Welcome into the uptempo hardcore kick tutorial. In this kick tutorial, you are going to learn how to make this kick sound from scratch using Serum and a couple of FL Studio stock effects. And if you really feel brave, you can even use Saturn and Pro Q. This is how the kick sounds like. This is playing from Nimble Kick Sampler, and I'm just playing a screech from my upcoming preset pack for Serum on top of this kick. You can also use this kick to make melodies, aka you can pitch the kick. And if you are feeling super brave, you can of course slow down the tempo. If you wanna use it in raw style, I recommend using my kick creation process, what you're about to see, to make the same kick, but just in lower tempo. So you can adjust the timings of the kick to fit into slower tempo genres like raw style or even hardstyle. If this little preview tingles your funny bone, get ready, because next up we are going to move into the tutorial. We are going to use all the oscillators except the noise sampler. But let's begin with the oscillator A. This is going to be our resonant peep style punch. I find this particular wavetable called to be pretty good with these sounds. You can adjust the position of this when we have something going on here. So usually next what I like to do is I like to open up the distortion, because this whole thing is based around the distortion. The diode one is perfect for this because it's not soft, but it's not too hard either. If you are, for example, using the zero square distortion, it is basically, to my knowledge, a wave shaping distortion, which is just going to look like this. So it's going to boost the positive and the negative side of the waveform to 100%, so it's super rough distortion. We don't want that for this kick because we are trying to keep this clean. And I'm already going to open up the pre-filter to somewhere around 800 Hz. So let's see how it sounds now. It's just a distorted wavetable. We are going to move down a couple of octaves and turn down the randomness, because we want to start to play the wavetable at the same position every time. Now, I usually like to use this mode when designing kicks in Serum. It's just kind of an oversampling thing, but you don't need to use that if you don't want to. The next thing we are going to do is the pitch LFO. So I have this thing here. It's a ready-made preset that I can just load up and adjust if I want to, but usually this works just fine. We are going to go to the matrix, and you can drag this here or select it from the menu, and we are going to control the global master tuning of Serum with this LFO. Let's make the LFO work unipolar, so it starts from 0 and goes up to wherever we want to set it up. I'm gonna set it up to 48. And remember to set the LFO to envelope mode, so it triggers every time you trigger a new note. Let's see what we have now. Next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to open up the main filter of Serum, and let's select a multi-filter. As usual, resonance 100%. Then we are just basically going to find a nice resonant peak. Maybe there for now. Now let's create a new LFO and do shape something like this. We are going to use this LFO to trigger a couple of different things. For now, we are going to drag this into our mix of the main filter. And remember to put it into envelope mode. And let's check it out. Now you can hear we are kind of starting to shape the kick. Now the next step is going to be the tail. I'm going to leave the level of the oscillator A just like so, and we are going to use the oscillator B to add to this sound. And now the LFO number 2 is coming handy. We are going to drag this into the level of oscillator B, and we are going to reverse automate it. So now what is going to happen is whenever we are at this point up here, this level knob is going to be at 0. So it kind of works inverse when we automate it like this. If you do it like this, it works normally, just like the filter. So we are going to reverse that, like so. And you can hear it working. Again, we are going to turn the phase randomness to 0. Move it down a couple of octaves. And now we are going to use just a simple sine wave to create our tail. As you can hear, the tail is super boring sounding. So there is one trick you can do to make it more interesting. I like to use the sub oscillator here, turn the level all the way down, maybe move 1 octave up, and use the frequency or phase modulation from the sub oscillator. You can now hear that more crunchy uptempo style sound we are looking for. Now I probably want to make the kick move a bit, so let's do a shape something like this. Drag it into the frequency modulation thing. It's super subtle, but we are working with distortion here, so whatever we do here is going to multiply when we add more EQ peaks and boost stuff into the distortion. Now, one trick to make your tails even more fat is to use unison. But the problem here is this. Now it's stereo and it is going to sound horrifying in mono. So we can go to the global section here. And these settings are for the oscillator A and the oscillator B. And we have the unison width here. Let's turn this to 0. Now you can hear, even if I use unison, it's going to be mono. So it's not going to spread the different copies of the oscillator into the stereo field. Now let's try to fine tune the detune. You can hear that we are kind of changing the way the tail sounds with the detune. This is something that I use personally a lot when designing kick sounds. Okay, I think we are pretty much done at this section here. We can move on to adding some more effects. Now, first thing we want to do is to add an equalizer before the distortion. Something super important to understand when working with mixers or plugins is that these effects slots work like a waterfall. The water falls down. And if you add something upstream, it is going to change the flow of the water downstream. Order of the effects matters. Now, what we are trying to achieve with the equalizer is to add one more peak here. Something like this. Here we have the really high-pitched sound that I'm looking for. And something that you can try to do is to create a peak. What we can do with this low frequency peak here is to use the same thing we used to control our tail sound with the frequency modulation and add it to the gain like so. You can hear how the equalizer is kind of shaping the kick. The more low frequencies you boost into the distortion, the more muddy or bassy or messy the sound is going to get. If I just crank the gain all the way up for the low end, the peak here is going to completely disappear. So we need to be careful with this. Next up, we can try to add a LFO to the frequency of this peak here. We can try to move it around just a touch, maybe something like this. Now let's add some more drive to our distortion. Next up, something else we can try is the phaser. We are going to add the phaser in between the equalizer and the distortion. First things we want to do is we want to set the rate to 0 because we don't want to move the all-pass filters around in the phaser. We want to make them stationary. This is kind of like a disperser effect. And the depth, we are also going to move all the way to 0 to make sure that the sound is completely mono. Now, just by moving this frequency dial, we can start to edit our sound. Let's see what else we can find here. I would personally like to try to edit the low frequency boost. Welcome into FL Studio. I have this template here, and what we are doing here is that we are playing the kick from Serum. Now, the problem with this kick is that it is too bright, it's too hollow, too light sounding, I will say. We need to make it more like a kick, and surprisingly, that is not easy. This is kind of the hardest part in my opinion. But you can approach this problem by using the similar principles we used inside Serum. We are just going to do the same thing in our mixer track here. I'm going to enable the equalizer and the Destructor plugin. We have this equalizer before the distortion. Let's see how these things change the sound. So here comes the secret for creating kicks. It's practice. Do it again, 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 and again. But we can of course talk about these settings and what is kind of happening here. So as I said before, probably, we are using the same principles as we do inside the Serum. We are using this low self-boost again to boost low frequencies into the distortion. It's going to make the sound more muddy and gritty and all that goodness. This usually only works for the tail. So if we just boost the sound statically, this is going to happen. the whole kick gets clogged up. So this is why I have this automation clip here. When the punch hits, there are no low frequencies. When the tail comes alive, like this, we are boosting the low frequencies. This is shaping the kick. This is a simple concept, and if you get this concept, you can make kicks. So this is how I think when I create these kick sounds. If I feel like there is too much mid heaviness on the tail, well, I just simply make a EQ cut to remove some of that from the tail and leave it for the punch, because punch usually needs those mid frequencies. It's super simple thinking that makes these concepts easy to understand and actually practical to use. Then we have one static cut. This is also pretty important, so let's remove this cut completely and let's take a listen. And let's activate the cut. Again, now we are using this cut to shape our whole kick. This is not mix EQ. This is not traditional EQing. We are using EQ to shape our sound because we are using the equalizer before the distortion. So I hope everyone got that. And I think I've been talking about this concept of shaping your kicks with equalizers, at least on my Patreon and on my YouTube channel as well. And with the Serum tutorials, that's everything I do. I use the EQ to shape the kicks, just like everybody else probably does. What is happening in between the EQ and the destructor? We are using this FL Studio stock patcher plugin called the Noise Unit. And the name tells it all. It's just going to add noise to our signal. So let's hear the sound without the patcher noise unit thing, and with that. Simple as that. Lastly, we have a convolver adding some reverb, but as you saw here, I already recorded the reverse reverb thing, so we probably don't need this. And yeah, you're probably wondering, what is this Lazer sample? It is just the same kick printed from Serum, but I pitched it down and added some pogo. Next up, we are going to go into our bass channel. In our bass channel, I usually like to add some soft saturation like Saturn, which is just honestly making it louder and touch more soft. Then I have this interesting looking equalizer here. This EQ is removing some resonant frequencies. I use this technique called EQ matching. You can go and find information about EQ matching if you want to. YouTube is full of tutorials. So this is just basically removing some of the unwanted frequencies from the signal. Now this is our kick. Let's just trust the process and record the kick. Now this is our kick that we are going to use. You heard the little drop thing in the intro part, and it was probably this thing here. So now we can just render our kick out and replace it with this one. And that is how you make uptempo kicks.